I find a boundary is something that, I'm comfortable doing, this is the point where I say no. Like, or I feel like I should stop.
Yeah. So you have boundaries to kind of know where you end and where the other person begins. What you're okay with them doing or not doing. But there's also a lot of different kinds of boundaries. You can have external boundaries that you have with other people, like you may not touch me that way, or you may not hug me, whatever it might be, it's okay. And there's also internal boundaries, which are more of like the things you put in place to make sure that you're okay, your internal self is all right. They kind of, I did bring my notes tonight. So internal boundaries, the things that you put on yourself. So like, example, an internal boundary I have right now is I'm celibate. I don't participate in penetrative sex because my internal self needs that closure. It needs to not be putting that energy out. So these things can be anything, like that's a big one, but like, they can be little things. Like I won't eat chocolate if I haven't worked out already, things like that. These boundaries, the internal boundaries, you set these so that you can give consent. Because if you don't have boundaries set within yourself, you can't exactly tell other people it's okay. And that's kind of where I've always struggled with, not knowing where my boundaries were, and then people cross them, and you can't really be like, hey, like, you crossed a boundary because no one knew. So once you set your boundaries, how do you guys think you should go about implementing them? How do you talk to potential partners or anyone about these boundaries that you've set for yourself?
That's a question, yeah?
Yeah, it's a question.
Well, what I do in relationships is I set it really clearly up front. This is what my expectations are. This is how I play. This is how I have sex. This is how I relate to you in our connecting with one another. And if you want that, great. If you don't want that, that's fine. So I don't let other people dictate my behavior. So I say this is how I roll, and if you want to roll with me like that, you're in very good hands. And so far, it hasn't let me down.
Awesome. That's really great to hear. It's I always struggle with telling people boundaries because I'm afraid they're not going to love me, they're not going to want to be with me because they're like, oh, well, you don't want to do that. So it's cool to hear success stories because it is successful usually.
Yeah, and I think that is a really big problem, trying to find that acceptance through just giving people what they want versus telling them what you want. And it's amazing how you can find exactly what you're looking for by just communicating, hey, I like when you do this. Don't do this. This is how I present my body. It's like, no, I don't shave, or I don't like to brush my teeth before I kiss if it's late night. It's little things. It's little things. It's like, I'm going to make out with you, but it totally smells like half a cow breath. Those feelings? But yeah, someone who totally gets, it's like, yeah, I'm going to be stinky sometimes, or maybe I'm a little grumpy. And maybe my boundaries change depending on what mood I'm in, Just because I like vanilla cake one day doesn't mean I want it every day of the week.
Totally. That's a really great point, actually, that boundaries can change. They change minutely, hourly, daily.
Situation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's boundaries aren't set, and I feel like that's something that people can struggle with sometimes. I feel like another thing to remember is to set your boundaries from a place of love rather than a place of shame and guilt. Not building these things up for yourself to not do because you're ashamed of it, but rather, to make sure that you're okay and you're happy and loved. I guess that will lead me into my next part, which is consent. Well, actually, no, there's one more part. What do you do actually when your boundaries are not respected?
I immediately correct it. Because there's always a consequence to breaking a boundary.
Yeah.
Always. So if you're lackadaisical, if you say, this is my boundary, for instance, we don't argue and yell at each other in the morning, regardless of how we're feeling, because then that sets the day wrong. If that boundary is broken, you can see the door and we'll talk later.
Yeah.
Enforcing the boundary is the key. not enforcing it, then there's chaos.
Definitely, I completely agree. I guess I'm wondering more so about, because it's definitely like you should enforce your boundaries. Sometimes it can, for me at least, I see personally, it can be hard to do that. I find I statements really helpful. We've all heard about those. Like, I don't like this, and I always used to I like to add on why, because when you just tell someone something, it doesn't quite stick as much as if you're like, I don't like it when you hit me because,
It leaves a mark.
I also feel that like if you don't like something and you don't really want to share why, that's totally okay also.
I completely agree. Yeah, totally. Yeah, you are allowed to feel what you want, and you're allowed to want what you want, and that's okay. That's a big thing that we do at Consensual Circus is kind of expelling that shame from everything that surrounds sex in our culture.
For me, I had a lot of experiences, almost all my sexual experiences that involved intercourse were me just giving up after saying like no. Like, you're cuddling with this guy and he's like, come on, come on. And you're like, no. And I think that happens a lot with like being younger.
But it's that myth too, that
But-
no means
yeah.
yes. That's why you always got to be firm, like no.
Yeah.
Well,
If you're not firm, you know what I mean?
So if you tell a guy like no, and you're like laying there having a nice time cuddling, and all of a sudden he like won't fucking stop, and then you're like no, you get up, the whole night's ruined. So it's really awkward to
It
choose
is,
that
yeah.
boundary.
Yeah, but I'd rather have a night ruined than make someone feel uncomfortable, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's a good point. Like
Yeah.
I hear that.
Oh,
But
wow.
now at my age, I'm just
Like I'm a man, you know what I mean? So for me to say that, you know what I mean? It's kind of like, you know what I mean?
You don't have to yell no either. Like when I've had that happen to me, I go no thank you. And if they continue, I'm like, hey,
I'm gonna go.
I really enjoy sitting here and cuddling with you. I don't enjoy you crossing my boundaries.
That's
If
true.
you
Yeah.
could not do that, that would make me, I don't want our night to be ruined.
No, there's
Let's
sometimes-
leave it what it is.
You'll hear the next day that, oh,
And you don't want to be around, and anyone who's not going to respect that boundary isn't someone you want to be with.
exactly.
Your body's a temple, you should treat it that way. If nobody's going to respect your boundaries, it's your body.
It's all about communication and being firm,
But you
basically.
can't be upset with somebody if they're not communicating. You
Yeah.
have to communicate. And I think that's huge is that a lot of, I know as a female, like that's something I learned having multiple partners is like communication, because they don't know they're crossing a boundary unless, like Mallory said, unless it's laid out. And if you don't speak up, like there's been times when I was younger and I was having sex and there was a lot of things I didn't want to do, but I was nervous of upsetting my partner.
That's
So
what it is.
I
It's like,
kept going, and
Yeah.
that shouldn't happen. If I'm uncomfortable and it needs to stop, and if they can't respect that, then they don't respect you.
It's communication all the
Just a quick
time.
question for the women in the room. Are you guys terrified of the reaction of a man?
No.
Depends.
That ain't
Sometimes
gonna
happens
happen.
situationally.
What does it
One
depend
night,
on?
one night stands are so different than me having sex with my partner. Because my partner, if I tell him no, he's not gonna one night stands, if I go home with somebody from a bar, I don't know how they're gonna react if I upset them.
Right.
If I say no, and that's where it can get a little scary if you don't know. But with my partner, when he's, if we're having sex and he starts touching me away, I'm like, hey, you're just gonna move his hand away, and it's a little bit more accepted in that
Yeah.
because there's that level of respect for each other, rather than if I've just been seeing this guy for a couple of weeks, or I go home with a guy from a bar, or a girl even, because it happens girl on girl, it happens guy on guy, all the
Is the
time.
communication in your experience the same between men and women and women and women?
Yeah, actually, for me it has been. When I've had sex with women and I don't like what they're doing, and I say the same thing, thank you, I prefer, and I try to redirect. I don't try to just get no. I try to be like, I'm not really into that, but I'm super into you playing with my nipples right now, or I'm super into being slapping around. I'm not just like no, because that'll totally kill a mood for the night, and that's why I don't think unless it's forceful, you shouldn't have to be forceful with your no, because somebody that respects you will respect you when you say no. But if you're like, no, I don't want you touching me, they're gonna think that your no means yes, and that's when you have to be like, no, I don't really like that, but and you present a different opportunity for them to explore. And if they don't want to explore that, be like, well, then we can just lay here. And that's totally
how
fine.
I see men react is they're coming from a place of not I see guys get triggered because they are not satisfying, So if you say I don't like that, then I see guys get upset because they take it, it's an ego thing, and because men want to please women, and so when they're not, and that's even, I'm a dancer, and even during lap dances, like I've had guys be like, get so upset because they did something that I didn't like, and it's like, it's such an ego.
Well, but the thing is, it's like because you're setting a limitation, and then they're expecting more, and then you crack the whip.
Yeah,
and they're like, they don't like that.
sometimes, but I think sometimes it's like they do something to try to make you feel good,
Yeah.
and then when it doesn't, it like really crushes them.
That's why I feel like it's important while you lay the boundary down to tell them why. You know, because it's like for me, like I don't do penetration. So like people like they hear that and they're like, oh well, like you know, people take it personally sometimes.
There's other
But it's
ways to
things
have
about-
sexual pleasure without full penetration.
Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, it's about. So, cool. That actually kind of brings me into my next point, which is consent, specifically enthusiastic consent. I've always felt growing up, kind of like how like it's like you're laying in bed and like you're like wanting to snuggle and you're like no, and they keep pushing. First off, that's rape if you keep going. Personally, I consider that rape. But how I define consent is people allowing you to come to a boundary and you allow them to come through. Where versus enthusiastic consent, which is allowing people to cross your boundaries, but then throwing them a party on the other side of that line. Being super stoked that they have crossed that boundary and that they now share this vulnerable space with you. I feel like that helps to play less of a goalie, kind of like no, like kind of always saying no and like always trying to correct someone into what you want, rather than just being like, fuck yes, I would love that.
Do any of you guys have a hard time letting go in bed? Just letting go? Letting
Yes.
man be?
Energetically and not
Depends on the
physically.
situation.
More of like an in general, right? We all have different individual experiences. But in general, do you find it hard to just let go, let the man lead?
You let the man lead.
It depends on if he knows what he's doing.
And how often do you experience that? The man knows what
Not
he's
very
doing?
often. My current partner is probably the first partner that's literally I haven't had to fake a single orgasm with a single time. He's the first man, and I believe that's due to the connection that we share. But when I'm having sex with somebody, I usually give them 100% whether I come or not. Because I personally like guys like to make girls come. I really like to get guys off. It turns me on to like I come just by them coming, like they don't have to touch me. So I try to give 100% of myself. So for me personally, I don't feel it's hard to let loose because I like to have sex and I like to have fun during it and I like playful sex and I like intimate sex, I like rough sex. It's a whole range and it just really depends on the situation. Depends on how comfortable I am with the person.
I think it depends on how
Sex.
comfortable you are with yourself too.
Yeah, very much.
Because you can be with a bunch of people who are awesome and you don't realize that because you're so worried about this person and what they think. It's like, oh my god, is there a zit on my ass? Or like little things. We've all been there. I don't think anyone's been there. And you're just like little things like, oh I didn't shave today. Oh my god, is he not gonna eat my pussy? Little things.
He will, don't worry.
Dude, I've stopped shaving and I found the most amazing men by not shaving. It's like 100% genuine. Because I'm finally like, yeah, okay, like this is what you're getting. Versus trying to put on a facade like, okay, I look perfect all the time, like.
Yeah, because you could be you, right?
What?
Because you could be you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I feel like it doesn't matter necessarily who I'm with as much as I'm comfortable with me and you reflect that. If you're a mirror to who I want to portray myself as and you're like, I'm cool with that, then I think that makes it much easier to let go within yourself because they will let go and they'll reciprocate that energy.
I feel like that goes back to boundaries.
Yeah.
Having set boundaries so you know.
So you can feel comfortable.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I think that consent goes on all those other than sex. Like, I recently
Yeah.
picked up nude modeling and photography, and the very first one I did, I was very uncomfortable. I didn't know if it was just something that is normal with nude photography. The photographer put his hand on my ass to like move it, and that's not okay.
Just for the record,
Ever.
that is never
Never okay.
Speaking as a photographer.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're like the three over there.
Because here's why. that's not acceptable, regardless of if that's a male model, a female model, if that person is clothed, if that person is naked.
You're crossing a
When
boundary.
when somebody is putting themselves in that horrible position for you, one, just so you can see it, two, let alone so they can document it for all the world to see, and especially in the digital world that we have today, I think it is very important for photographers to, one, take their personal, like, whatever gets them off out of the situation, be a complete professional, and do whatever it takes to make sure that that model, regardless of what gender they are, feels absolutely comfortable with you and is absolutely safe with you. I've shot many people lately naked. Last year I did a whole series of photos where I had people out in nature, and a lot of times I had naked people like on cliffs, in streams, like out in pseudo public areas, and my whole like just drive was to make sure they felt comfortable and they felt safe in that environment. And it kills me to hear that you were in that position, because that person like sort of like ruins it for everybody and potentially puts you in, if you do have a photographer that treats you with respect and understands your boundaries, he sort of ruins it for that guy that does respect that. To where you're going to go into the next photo shoot where you're going to be nude and you're going to have a little bit of trepidation and a little bit of thing, and it's going to take you a minute to build up a rapport with that photographer to have that trust. And so
Well, I never went back to him. He asked me to do another one. He did more things than that. He like lightly touched my nipple at one point.
Oh
and
my
I didn't
God.
Was someone you found on Model Mayhem?
No, not somebody found him on Mayhem. He's Craigslist when I very first started, and like, it wasn't until I did this very last shoot that I did another nude shoot, and it was really awesome. I really liked the photographer, he was really nice, but just to even move my hair, he was very hesitant to even ask me because he didn't want to invade that space. And I was chatting with my girlfriend about it, and that's something that I figured that going into nude shoots now, I just need to make that apparent. Be like, hey, you didn't ask me before you touch me at all.
Yeah.
Before you
Better
touch my
take an
space."
escort, too.
If anybody's in a photo shoot and you feel uncomfortable, do not hesitate to get the fuck
Stop.
up,
Yeah.
put your
Stop.
clothes on,
Leave.
and say, fuck
Leave.
you. Let me see your CF card, erase all these images, I'm out of here. And if you use any of those images, I'm gonna fucking sue you.
Take an
Because
escort.
It's just, I'm a professional photographer. I work at
now.
yeah, and it's just like, as a commercial photographer, I could get insanely sued, and your reputation as a photographer could be ruined because, like, I want to shoot nude stuff and weird creative stuff too. But if an insane brand came to me and wanted to like, sort of like play off of that vibe and wanted to use me commercially, I would hope that like my reputation would speak for itself. And like, you hear like the American Apparel guy, you hear about all these creepy people, and like the casting couch has been around forever. And it's just, as a white male photographer, you're sort of pigeonholed these days into being a creep already. And it's like, I find it like, until I got here, and like people in Denver are very accommodating and like insanely cool and comfortable. Like I really love shooting here. But like when we were in Vegas, it was just, there's so many creeps out, and especially like the Vegas environment, that it was hardly impossible for me to find people that either wanted to do it or felt comfortable. And so
It was definitely a lesson at that point where now I am establishing boundaries in that area of my life too, because you're very vulnerable when you're naked and standing there with another male who is significantly larger than you, and he's already handled you a couple of times. Now he never touched me like in any way, it was just very light, but it nonetheless it made me uncomfortable, and that's what I should have done, is set those boundaries and then told him, no, that's not okay with me. And that's where I messed up, and that's where you learn from
And
mistakes.
here's the thing, if you ever want to find out if one of these dudes is a creep, ask them if you can bring a friend. And say your boyfriend. Say, come on, boyfriend, come. And if he's got a problem with it, he's a fucking creep.
Yeah.
And sorry, I use a lot of profanity, I just cuss a lot as a sailor. No, I'm a Scorpio. Okay, but no, I dealt with it. I've even some of my model friends, one of my friends, she was doing some foot fetish stuff, and she was like, hey, if you come to this studio just to check it out, just to make sure this dude's okay, like, and the cool thing is you can bring somebody, they don't have to stay for the whole shoot, but You just bring somebody, let them know